Year 7, hope you're all okay. Obviously we haven't done a little video for a while because last couple of lessons have been a bit different. Obviously you had your VE day challenges, which I was really impressed by the way, some fantastic work. So keep an eye out, have a look in the mitre, because you might see some of your work there, well done. And also last week we were doing essay dirt, so we haven't done any actual history really for a little while. So today we're going to try and get back into that. So I'm going to make you a little video just to talk you through the activities and explain some of the ideas and concepts to you, and hopefully that will be useful. As of after half term, I'm going to try and sort us out a Zoom sort of meet up once every 2 weeks, alright? So every few lessons we get together on Zoom. I'll give you more details about that when I've sort of planned out the timetable and things, but that is on its way. So today we're going to follow up what we did a little while ago, which was we looked at an event called the Peasants' Revolt. And what we did a few lessons ago was we looked at the events of the Peasants' Revolt and what happened and kind of how it all went down. What we're going to do today is we're going to look at why it happened. So what caused this major revolt of the peasants, this sort of massive, crazy event to take place? What inspired that? So we're going to have a look at that today. So the first thing I would like you to do is, once you've done your date and title in your book, is I've got a quizzes for you to take just to see how much you can remember about the events of the Peasants' Revolt. So you should all have joined the class already because of last time we did a quizzes. So if you just click that link, it should automatically say you've had it assigned to you. If that doesn't work for whatever reason, use this code and you should be able to do the quiz. Okay, and what I'd like you to do is keep playing the quiz over and over until you can play the whole thing and get full marks. Okay, that's really important. Make sure you can do it and you can get full marks just so you're totally all up to speed and happy with how the major events of the Peasants' Revolt happened. Okay. So let's get started. So when you've done the quizzes, the first thing I'd like you to do after that is copy these keywords and their definitions into your book. So as I said, what we're looking at today is the causes of the Peasants' Revolt. Okay, and these two keywords, they are big causes. One of them is something called the Statute of Labourers, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute, and the other is called the poll tax. Okay, so Statute of Labourers, it sounds a little bit weird, you might not understand those words. What statute means is law, and labourers means workers, so it is a law for the workers. Okay, and essentially this law was passed in 1351, so just after the Black Death, and it made peasants illegal for them to be paid more than they were before the Black Death. Okay, and I'll talk about why that is in just a sec. The second key word is poll tax. Okay, this was a new tax that was brought in 1377, so about 20 years after the Statute of Labourers. And what this tax said was that everybody, if you were over the age of 14, no matter how poor you were, no matter how rich you were, is you had to pay 1 shilling to the king as a tax. Okay, and that's a lot of money for that time. The average peasant, that's a good week's worth of their wages. So a week's worth of all the money they earned, they were expected to pay to the king. Okay, now obviously normally the people that pay the taxes are the barons, but this was for ordinary people, so it was a bit different, and obviously lots of people hated it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about each of these things now. So let's start with the Statute of Labourers. Okay, so for this we've got to think back a little bit to when we were doing the Black Death a few weeks ago. Now, remember what the Black Death did to the feudal system. Okay, that triangle, that pyramid, the way society worked. So many peasants were killed that it didn't really work anymore because there weren't enough peasants to do all the work, which meant that the peasants that were left were suddenly very valuable, right? Because all of the barons and the knights still needed people to do their farming for them, which meant that the remaining peasants got a little bit more freedom. They were able to say, look, you pay me more and I'll work for you, because there weren't enough workers. So if the lord said no, the peasant would say, oh, jog on then. They would go work for someone else, and then that lord would be stuck. So basically the peasants could ask for whatever money they wanted, and the lords had to say yes, because there weren't very many peasants left and they needed them. All right, they needed them more than the peasants needed the lords, basically, thanks to the Black Death. So it put the peasants in a slightly better position. It gave them the opportunity to earn a bit more money and to ask for better conditions and more freedom. Now, unsurprisingly, the lords weren't too thrilled about that, because previously to the Black Death, the part of the system of the feudal sort of way it worked was that the peasants had to do a certain number of days every year of free work for their lord. All right. So if you look at this graph, these are the amount of sort of days that were worked in that sort of 5-year period for free. Okay, so the number of days that vary. So this is one place, one lord in a place called Oxfordshire, Lord of Cuxham. All of his peasants did this many days of free work for him during these years. Okay, so a lot. You can see nearly sort of 1,400 days of free work he was getting every year from his peasants. Right, he didn't have to pay them for that. You can see in the year of the Black Death, it was particularly high. Now look what happens after the Black Death. Massive drop. Okay, because suddenly there aren't enough peasants to go around, and they have said, you know what, Mr. Lord, we don't want to work for free. We're not going to do that. And you can see on this graph just how dramatic that drop was. So this was all the days that peasants had worked for free before the Black Death, and this is afterwards. So huge drop. And what they started to say was, right, well, you know what, you can pay us more. We're not going to work for free, you're going to pay us decent wages. And have a look. So this is the total amount of wages that same lord paid every year. Very, very low to start with. After the Black Death, it shoots up. And remember, there's actually less peasants around then. So this huge amount of money is actually shared out between less people. So they're all getting even more. So peasants, they don't want to work for free and they want to have more money. Unsurprisingly, the lords don't like that. They get angry about that. They don't want to pay the peasants more. That's ridiculous. They're peasants. They should do what they're told. So, the king at the time, so 1351, so this is only a couple of years after the Black Death. The Black Death was 1348, it first arrived. So, a few years later, the king, who was called Edward III, he passed a special law. And that was the Statute of Labourers, so the law for the workers, if you remember. And what that law said, this is a copy of it, was that peasants were not allowed to be paid any more than they were in 1347. So if we look back at this graph, 1347, that's how much they were being paid. And the law said that from now on, you could not be paid more than that. And as you can see from this graph, they were being paid a lot more. So they made that illegal for them to get more money. The peasants thought that was obviously super unfair. Like, why have you passed a law saying we can't be paid more? That's so unreasonable. They were really angry about that. So that was a problem. It was a long-term problem, one that had happened quite a few years before. The Peasants' Revolt is in 1381, if you look. So this is 30 years before that, but obviously it upset the peasants and it was still a law at the time of the revolt. Now, our second keyword was something called the poll tax, and this was a more recent law. Okay, so Richard II, he becomes king aged 14. All right, he was a very, very young boy. Okay, by the time he becomes king, England's been fighting a war for years and years and years. And it's really expensive to fight a war, and the people that pay the taxes are the barons, mostly. So the barons had been paying out for this war for years, and they were fed up with paying. So, the king, his uncle, called the Duke of Lancaster, now if you remember, the Duke of Lancaster is the one whose house got burnt down in the Peasants' Revolt, because they hated him so much, he comes up with a new tax. Okay, he says, right, barons, you don't want to pay any more. Let's get the ordinary people to pay. And he invents this thing called the poll tax. Okay. Now, as I said before, that is 1 shilling per person. No matter how rich you are, no matter how poor you are, it's the same cost. About a week's wages, right? Now, prior to this, if you paid tax, it was per house. So if you had you, your wife, your kids all living in the same house, you would only have to pay one load of tax. But now you have to pay tax per person. So that means you have to pay, in that case, sort of 4 times as much, because you've got to pay for your wife, you've got to pay for your kids, you've got to pay for yourself. So the poll tax meant a lot more money. It was a high tax anyway, and it meant a lot of more money had to be paid out. And it was supposed to be a one-off to pay for the war. But Richard tried to collect it 3 times in 4 years. Okay, so he promised it was only going to be once he was going to take this money, and actually he took it 3 times. So that is what, as you can see in 1381, this is what kicks all the revolt off, this tax. People get fed up with having money taken off them, and they start to attack the tax collectors. And that is what evolves into this all-out attack on London that the Peasants' Revolt becomes. Richard is blamed on this. He's only a child, okay? He's only a kid. So, as I said, it wasn't actually his idea, this tax. It was his uncle, the Duke of Lancaster. Okay, so a lot of people in England blamed his advisors. So, they said the king, he's only young, it's not his fault, it's his advisors' fault. And you can see this is one of the other advisors. He's the Archbishop of Canterbury, called Simon of Sudbury. This is his actual head, because the peasants dragged him out and cut it off, and it's still been preserved. Okay, so these two men, the Duke of Lancaster, the king's uncle, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, they get the blame for the poll tax. Okay, and that's what kicks events off. Okay, so those are your two keywords. All right, you need to know what both of those things are, because they're going to come up again later in this lesson, and hopefully that explanation has helped. Okay, so your main task is, what I'm going to ask you to do is, in your book, and you need a full page, is draw this table. So it should be a full page landscape. Okay, and it's got 3 columns. Okay, one that is political, so a political causes to do with running the country. One that's economic, so to do with money and trade and tax and things like that. And then one that is religious. So that's pretty obvious, it's to do with religion. So it's the same 3 categories that you had for your John essay. Okay, political, economic, and religious. What you're going to do is, you've got a card sort that looks like this attached to show my homework. You are going to sort all of these cards, all of these reasons, into these 3 columns. Okay, so let's read this one. Richard was only 14 in 1381. His father, Edward, had been very popular with the people and was an adult, but had died when Richard was only a baby. Richard was not as popular as his dead father. Okay, so which one would that go into? Well, it's about the king, it's about running the country, so political could work. It's not to do with money, so it can't be economic, and it's not to do with religion really either. So that first card, this one, is to do with running the country, so that's got to go in political. Okay, and you do that same process for all of these cards. Okay, if you can't print them, okay, if you don't have a printer, that's fine. You're just going to need to draw the table and copy them into it, all right? You need to get them in there somehow, all right? So it might just be you have to copy them out. Okay. So when you've done that, task 4 is you're going to need 2 colours. Okay, so you've got a table and it's filled with all these different pieces of evidence. Okay, what you're going to do is you're going to go through and you're going to sort that evidence into these 2 categories. You're going to colour code it. So one of them is long term. So a long term cause has been going on for quite a long time. Okay, it's been going on for a while. So if we look at this, the Statute of Labourers, that was in 1351. The Peasants' Revolt is in 1381. So that's a long time ago. So that must be a long term cause. If you look at this one though, revolt was triggered in 1381 when the poll tax was put in. That's got to be a short-term cause, because that happened just before. Okay, so you go through your table and you sort all of your cards into those 2 categories. What is long-term, so it's been going on for a while, and what is short-term, so what has happened just before. Okay, so a few minutes just to do that sorting. When you have done that, okay, your final task today is you're going to use that table and the colour coding you've just done to answer this question. You're going to write a peel paragraph. Do you think long-term or short-term causes were more important in causing the Peasants' Revolt? So do you think it was things that had been happening for a long time before? Or do you think it was things that happened just before? So the short-term, the immediate things, the poll tax, that were mostly to blame? And what I'm going to ask you to do, just so I can see your answer and read it and maybe give you some feedback, is I'm going to ask you to post your answer in Microsoft Teams. Okay, so the way you would do this is if you just go on to Microsoft Teams, okay, so just whatever class you are. So these are my 3 Year 7 classes, maybe you pick that one. Okay, doesn't matter who you are, whichever one is your class. You've been added to it as a team. Click on this channel, Causes of the Peasants' Revolt, and then you post your answer in here. Okay, that's where you do it. Okay, and you need to use these sentence starters. Okay, I think that long-term or short-term causes, you pick which one you think, are the most important, etc., etc. Okay, so that is your work for today, and this means I have the opportunity to have a look at your answers on Teams and comment on them, hopefully in the next few weeks. Okay, guys, so if you have any problems, send me an email. Okay, please don't be afraid to do that. I'm here to help you. Okay, and hopefully that has all made sense. Thank you very much, guys. Have a lovely day.